Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 201 of Retro Power Uncut, and we're back in the workshop, and we've got a lot to catch up on because of our special, which we will be revisiting for the second half very, very soon. We just need to get that second half filmed because it was quite a marathon thing. It appears from the comments that generally people liked it, so that was good. And I noticed there was a lot of appreciation of Jamie's work there because Jamie's rare appearance on the camera, which is very good. But yeah, we're going to get straight into things here, and there's a lot going on at the moment. There's an awful lot going on in the metal. Well, there's a lot going on generally, but there's a hell of a lot going on in the metal workshop. So I think what we're going to start with is I'm actually just going to reverse my way up a little bit here and put my coffee down on top. Cal mentioned Bunker Tools, which is part of Draper Tools, and mentioned their toolboxes last week. Week before last, down at the Den. However, I think he also mentioned that we had a box on test, if you like, up here, and we do, and here it is. And we're really very, very pleased with it. It strikes exactly the right balance, being sufficiently heavy duty to withstand the type of environment we have here, which is pretty harsh, but not so heavy duty that it's a prohibitive cost. You know, the cost is very affordable, but it is incredibly well made. Now these boxes are I'm going to quote the size wrong now. I think they're 1400 long by 800 wide, or it's either that or it's 1200 long by 800 wide. I ought to know that bit. But they're drawers both sides, so they're 400mm deep drawers both sides of the box. So you've got 14 drawers to put stuff in, plus 2 cupboards, plus hanging space on the ends, which we're going to sort of add and improve and make some bits on there. They're just brilliant. The idea being that something I've wanted to do for a long time is get everybody set up so that we can have tools in your workbench. So your workbench is on top, your tools are in the drawers. Then you're not running around putting tools on trolleys, running to your toolbox at the side of the workshop. It's a nonsense. It makes no sense to have a toolbox somewhere apart from where you're working, because it just means you're walking backwards and forwards fetching tools. Whereas with one of these, you can have the tools at the site of your work. Everything's to hand. When you're working on the bench, just reach in the drawer, grab what you need, crack on with working. It just makes a huge amount of sense, but it does rely on the box being sturdy enough to withstand being worked on top. And these most definitely are. Having now had these around for a couple of weeks, you know, this is going to be longer term. We'll keep reporting back on these, but certainly short-term opinion, yes, they're more than heavy duty enough. They're absolutely spot on. The casters are incredibly sturdy. They've got a really good push-push brake on them, where you push one side for the brake on, push the other for the... I know that's not rocket science, but a lot of boxes don't have that. My Snap-on box doesn't have that. That has pretty rubbish brakes, if I'm honest. Considering the list price on my box over there is, I don't know, something like £7,500, I think. And these are a hell of a lot less than that. I'm not going to quote prices because it depends on discounts and things like that. But a fraction of that, let's just say that. Things like having really good casters on them does actually count for quite a bit, because you need to be able to put the brakes on and off easily, especially when you're in a workshop like ours with not a very flat floor. As you can see, we're on quite a slope here, so being able to just lock the brakes on and off really does help a huge amount. Going forward, we're also going to do something with Mac Industries. We're pointing at the banner on the wall. Been having a talk to them in the background for a little while about making fixture table tops for these benches, and that's the plan going forward. Is we're going to put 8mm thick steel fixture tops onto these, and that'll mean that we can do jig chasing work and we can do clamping and fabrication work directly on the top of the toolbox, and that's a really good way of working. Again, that's what I want to get to the point of, being able to do that. So we're going to put fixture table top on it with a return around it to reinforce it. It comes down and closes off some of this side section. And that should be a really sturdy, really nice piece of kit to have around the workshop. So watch this space. We'll keep reporting back on this, but we're really happy. Certainly, the initial sort of couple of weeks in, we're really happy with this bunker kit. It is extremely good, and I'm very happy that we've got it. I've had my eye on these for a long time. I've had a lot of chats with Cal about it, but the ducks weren't quite in a row, and we've just got them in a row. We've had a good conversation with Bunker. Yeah, we're really very happy with the outcome of that, and we're very, very happy with the kit. So moving on from that, as I say, we don't really do sort of advertising as such unless it's something you know from the past. You've all seen what I sort of, when I start talking about stuff in the background, I only talk about it if I'm keen on it, if I'm interested in it, and if it's doing the job properly. So that's that. Moving on from that, another thing which we haven't actually, I've got a list today because there's so much stuff that Jamie has printed me out a really good list. He always does me a list. I don't normally need it. Today I probably am. And the first two things I'm going to talk about aren't even on the list. The next thing I'm going to talk about, we're going to sneak through here, Jamie. I didn't even tell you about this. I didn't warn Jamie about this at all. You may remember some weeks ago, in fact, some months ago, we bought the press brake, the Bronx press brake, which you saw being unloaded on the video and is getting in. And then we briefly touched upon an Edwards True Cut DD guillotine, or shear, as they call them, which we had stored outside under a tarpaulin. And I think we showed some horrendous rat's nest wiring on that. Well, I've made a new panel for that. I've wired up a complete new control panel for it, and I was holding fire putting the control panel into it while the guillotine was residing outside, and I had no great reason to bring the guillotine inside because I hadn't really got any specific work for it to do, and I was busy. However, I do have a specific job where I need to cut an 8-foot long sheet now, so that catalysed the process of getting that guillotine inside, which we've now done. I don't know if we've got any footage of it coming inside. I think possibly not. But we've got it moved inside. It was a job Bobby and I did right at the end of the day a few days ago. Got this skated in, forklifted and skated into place. I've installed the new wiring panel into it that I had. I built it all up as a sub-assembly and got it all upstairs in our little maintenance department, but I hadn't actually fitted it to the machine. Now I fitted that, wired up all safety on it, and she's up and running, and it's started cutting. We've cleaned it all up because I put some rust preventative oil all over it, some just cavity wax type stuff all over it just to stop it corroding while it was outside under a tarpaulin. Cleaned all that off, put some lighting on it so we can actually see what we're cutting, and got the control panel all set up. It's all on 24 volt low voltage controls now, which these didn't have originally. These were on, I think they were on 110 volt controls. That is now on 24 volt controls, so super safe. It's got the right interlocks on it, it's doing all the jobs it should be doing, and it's making a very, very nice cut. Intriguingly, there was a question over the cut quality, and this came as a very, very, very cheap deal because it was kind of on the same lorry as the press brake, and the guy we got it from just said, you basically you can have it for £1,000, and so it got thrown in, and there was a question mark over whether it actually cut dead straight. What I can say is it appears to cut dead straight. And in fact, the blades don't even need regrinding or turning. They're actually perfectly sharp as well, which is not what I was expecting. I was expecting to have to do a blade turn at least on it. So really happy with that. Nice new bit of kit in the workshop, and we can now cut 8 foot long, or 2.5 metres long, in fact, on the guillotine, which is really good news. Right, we'll move on to cars now instead of mucking around with machinery. So we'll start with XJ Coupe. On this, Tom has finished off the rear end. We've talked a lot about that, so I'm probably not going to elaborate too much on that, but he's finished off all the little nitty-gritty, time-consuming little bits on that, making the little reinforcing. We wanted to put some reinforcing pads around the bolts that hold those rear corners on because they're a bit prone to cracking and a bit flimsy. So he's done that. He's re-edged all of the panels, got everything to line up nicely, bolted it all in place, checked it all, got it all where it needs to be. So that's all done. It's quite a lengthy job. But it's all sorted now, so the next job on that part, that particular area of the car, is going to really be the rear bumper. Prior to doing that, because we kind of need to put the car in the air to do the bumper, to sight up the lines and to make sure that bits of the mounting brackets aren't going to be visible from certain angles and things. So we really want to put the car back on the two-post lift to do that. We needed to take it off the two-post lift to do a couple of other jobs, so that job is now waiting. And Tom has moved on to doing the boot lid, which is lurking over there. So I'll point at that in a couple of minutes, actually. We'll come on to that in a minute as we go past it. More pressingly, right in front of me, Matt has moved on to doing the bonnet. In order to, we decided, rewinding a little bit, I'm losing track of time because we've got 2 weeks going on here. We decided last week that we were going to need to reskin the bonnet. It's quite rusty, and as you can see on the frame, there is quite a lot of surface corrosion, and the skin was very, very thin, and it's got quite a lot of trapped corrosion. Now, a lot of restorers I think, would not have removed that door skin. I think quite a few would not have done that. The bonnet skin. I think quite a few would not have done that, simply because visually it all kind of looked okay from the outside. I think a lot of people would have cleaned it up and painted it and waxed it, and that's that. We weren't happy with doing that, and as you can see now when it's de-skinned, you can see why that was a good call to make that decision. We were lucky with the bonnet skins in that there's a company that actually had them advertised on eBay, and they had, they had one. They think they've got another actually, which we might get as well, just in case for future reference. And they appear to be Jaguar parts, or at least the main pressing is Jaguar, because nobody's going to tool up the press tool to make this centre section, and it is definitely a pressing. And the steel it's pressed from, it's Zintek steel it's pressed from, and the line marking on the Zintek is would date it to a late 80s at the latest piece of steel. So I would say it was probably pressed some time ago, and it's definitely done on the Jag press tool. This is the old bonnet skin here, the new one's lurking in the workshop somewhere. And it does look, the actual pressing looks pretty good. It's been where it's been welded at the front, I do wonder whether it's a reject Jaguar part or something, because the weld line's not perfect at the front, but it's good enough. We can fettle that and get it right. But it's interesting. They were at the right price, and definitely the main part is a Jaguar pressing. So a bit of a mystery sauce, but anyway, we've got a bonnet skin. So Matt's just cleaning this up. He's going to remove all of the remaining bits of the front of the old bonnet skin from that, and then this is going to need blasting very, very carefully so we don't twist it and warp it. This is going to need a bit of a blast because it has got quite a lot of surface corrosion on it. So that's the next step on that. And to be able to fit that bonnet, to be able to do the bonnet reskin, we need to be able to fit it to the car to get all the alignment correct and make sure everything lines up nicely. In order to do that, needed to get the wings exactly lined up, and in order to do that we need to line up with the doors. And Matt discovered a little glitch in one of the door skins. It was slightly incorrectly made, and they are aftermarket door skins, and there was an error on the top of one of them. Not a huge error, about 5/16 of an inch, probably somewhere around about 8 mil, somewhere around there. The fold line where it meets the top of the scuttle was slightly in the wrong place. So he's had to unfold and refold that area and reshape that part of the door, and then move the door hinges in, move the wings in, get everything lined up there. But he's got the bonnet, prior to de-skinning it, he got the old bonnet to fit absolutely perfectly. Nice between 4 and 5 mil gap all round, so it's really, really nice and clean fit. And then he's de-skinned it, and that means now when we come to put the new skin on, we can do a trial fit and keep doing repeated trial fits to make sure it does fit. In order to be able to do that, he needed to be able to fit it to the bonnet hinges, and another point that needed repair was that the bonnet hinges and also bumper mounts, which slot into the end of the chassis rails, where they slot in and bolt in, they'd corroded. Where they're sandwiched into the end of the rail, they pick up a lot of salt water in the front of there, and they corroded through. So Matt's also done the repair work on those bonnet hinge and bumper mounts, and repaired those and got them refitted to the shell as well. So that's where he's at on XJC. That's progressing nicely. And yeah, so next stage, hopefully next week, you'll see bonnet reskinned pretty much there or thereabouts. Moving on from that, I'll pick up my coffee. I'm actually going to take my list with me as well so I don't forget everything. Moving on from that, we're going to stop at the Audi. I probably don't need this list immediately because some of the stuff's pretty obvious. This for certain is pretty obvious. We're going to stop at the Audi. Now, we've got a slight lull in the paint shop at the moment. We're slightly between jobs, and that's worked out quite well because I'm struggling to stay on top of everything I've got to do, and I've got to mark in Gaz that aren't completely flat out with body shop stuff. So that's worked well because they've been able to drop onto this. So I've given them a list of bits that need removing and areas that need attending to in terms of metal removal. So they've been cracking on with this and getting it de-panelled. So as you can see, we've left the B pillar and body side section, if you like, in place at the moment because there's a question mark over whether we remove all of that or whether we're going to do a split on part of that. So I've asked them to leave that in place for the moment, but it will be coming off. We need to lose the original B pillars have got to come off. But it's just where we do the cuts, and I need to go and check the CAD before we proceed with that. But as you can see, they've got, yesterday and this morning, got all of the rear panel removed, the outer quarters removed, the outer halves of the arch tubs removed, the forward sections of the inner quarters removed, the windscreen frame removed, and the scuttle top removed. So that's pretty good progress. It's coming along well, pretty neat job. One or two little slips, a couple of little drill holes through, usual sort of things, nothing too tragic there. And the other major bit that they've got removed is the cassette that held the pop-up roll bars. They've removed that, and also that's a significant reinforcer for the back of the cabriolet shell because it hasn't got a roof on it. Now obviously we're putting a roof on it, that's less critical, and it's in our way. It's in the wrong place. So that's all being removed. So that's all good progress, all looking good. And yeah, you'll be able to watch this develop. The next stage on this is going to be the Saab body shell, which I've literally just started just prior to doing this video, cutting some sections of steel to brace that up, because the next thing they'll be moving on to is starting to remove all of the metalwork that we don't need from the Saab shell. And that, I have to say, is nearly all of it. I'll wander over there and point at that. On the Saab shell, we're basically keeping the inner quarter panel, the outer quarter panel, and the inner and outer parts of the rear panel. Although a lot of that will go, the quarters, a substantial amount, if not all of the quarters, will become carbon fibre, so most of that will be going. We're keeping the B pillar, the inner and outer sections for the B pillar, the roof, and the windscreen aperture, and that's about it. Pretty much everything else is going. We're only really keeping those few bits. So I need to get some bracing in just to make sure that the structure just doesn't sort of become a wet paper bag. So we're going to put some bracing in just to hold everything in roughly the right places, so that when it's all cut apart, everything stays in place. And then, yeah, most of that will be removed. It has got a fair bit. I can see on a video, people will look at this and think, oh, that's a perfectly good car, you know, where you're cutting off. There is quite a lot of rust in this. It's not quite as perfect as it first appears on a video. So I wouldn't panic that we're getting rid of some perfect body shell. There's rust through the bulkhead in quite a few places. The sills are pretty rotten underneath. There's rot under the boot floor. There's rot in the inner arches. It is not by any means a perfect body shell. There's even a few bits of rust in some of the bits we actually need, annoyingly, so we have got some rot repair to do on it, despite only using about 3 panels of it. But yeah, that's the next phase really, is I'm going to be getting some bracing bars into this, so it can't all fall apart, and then Mark and Gaz will be setting to cutting this up, probably later today and into tomorrow. They'll be setting to cutting that up. The E-Type we're not going to go into now, because that's being worked on by Andy at Vintage Machines, and he is finishing the lower rear. You saw it was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I lose track, the upper rear sheet metal sections all done for that. He's now working on the lower rear sheet metal sections for that, and I think he's pretty much getting there. I think hopefully next week should see that pretty much done. I think that's where we're at with that one. So I'm going to move on from that. We'll swing back past here. I'll swing back towards talking about the Jag for a moment. I mentioned the boot lid. Tom's working on this at the moment. I'm going to make a mess of his area and look at this. Tom has he's cut the rear section off here. I don't think we've got that anymore, so I can't show you that, but that was pretty rusty. Had a lot of holes in it that needed welding up. We're modifying it anyway and deleting some of those holes. It had some rust holes in it, and it had quite a lot of rust on this lower edge. So the decision was made to reskin down to the panel joint, which is just under this radius on the rear of the panel. So Tom's made a cardboard template of that. He's then cut out some steel sheet, which looks like 20 gauge. Earlier on the guillotine, he's then put some various profile lines and markings on it to show what's got to be done where, lines on it to show what's got to be clinched round. He's then wheeled that up to get the curvature on it, because there's a slight bit of curvature to that. It's not a dead flat panel. Folded it, and then he'll be proceeding with getting that to fit this rear panel, be the right shape, and then that's all got to be tacked in place. Along there, probably some bits of braze put in, and then I think we're going to put a light little solder skim, a light lead solder line down that joint, because we can't weld it quite as frequently as Jag did originally, because we can't get in order to do that without removing this part of the skin from the boot frame. And we don't want to remove that bit, and we don't want to disturb that bit, because there's nothing wrong with that bit. So that's where Tom's at on the XJC. Moving on from that, there's a lot to cover on the Interceptor. In fact, Bobby and Stu are both currently working on this. and there's a lot that has happened since we last did any video of this. I'll talk about it first because it's nearest my leg. The bumpers. Stu went to do the final sort of trial fit up on the bumpers, and we've discovered various things. One, there's a lot of pitting in them. We had them chrome stripped, and that just confirmed that there was a lot of pitting in them. That wasn't a great surprise. I'm fairly confident that Derby Plating, who will be doing the chrome work, will be able to cope with that pitting. They'll probably watch this video and really curse now, I imagine. However, I'm sure they'll ring us if they can't cope with it. It's certainly going to need a lot of trips into the copper plating bath to fill those pits in, but we can't do a lot about that. It's either a different bumper, which is not quite so easy to do, or a lot of copper to fill those pits in. So we'll see how they get on. They'll let us know. If it's not possible, they'll let us know. Extremely good company to deal with. I can't recommend them enough. Derby Plating, not cheap, but you get what you pay for. Extremely competent, do exactly what they say they're going to do, when they say they're going to do it, and to exactly the correct standard. I can't really think that they've let us down at all in all the time we've been using them. We used a lot of chrome platers before we used them, and all of them were basically a disaster area, whereas Derby have just been perfect throughout. I think on one job some time ago they made a mistake, and that was just a mistake. There was a piece of finish that we'd asked to be polished on a part, and it wasn't actually very obvious where it was supposed to be polished. But they've got it slightly wrong. They got the finish slightly wrong. I seem to remember they turned that part round overnight and got it back to us the next day, which is pretty damn good service. So yeah, absolutely cannot fault them. Can't recommend them highly enough. So yes, Stu's gone onto the bumpers, dealt with the pitting, then onto the overriders, and the disappointments of the problems we've hit along the way. It's like going over the waves of the sea with this car, and we run into quite a lot of problems, and those were one of them. Went to fit the overriders, discovered that A, several of the studs were sheared off on them, and B, the mounting brackets that the sheared off studs were attached to were starting to rust and separate and come off the overriders. So Stu has both had to put new studs into them and actually make new insides for the overriders and then weld those into place. So he's now done that, and we now have overriders that actually fit, have studs, means to bolt them on with, and aren't scrap. So that was one chunk of work. Continuing with the sort of front to back approach on the Jensen, Bobby has been working on a lot of the nitty-gritty detail areas on the front of the car. One of which was the transmission cooler lines, which I think I alluded to on the last video that we mentioned this car on, so 2 weeks ago. He's now made those transmission cooler lines completely. We use a plastic coated aluminium hard line, which we buy from ATEC in Brackley, and Bobby has then used various tube bending devices to shape those tubes to what is quite a tight routing around the front end of this car. Although there's quite a lot of space in the car, it's all in the wrong places for where we need to route the hard lines. So it's actually quite tricky. It's been a fairly involved process, but he's got those routed through, and he's put all the mounting points for the clamps. We clamp all our lines using Stauf clamps of varying types, Stauf LN series clamps. For people watching the videos, that's a very useful thing. Stauf are a great company to deal with, and their clamps are absolutely perfect for this sort of work, and also pretty economic. They're not expensive either, and they're very well made. So yes, we clamp everything in place with Stauf clamps, and Bobby's put the mountings in place for those Stauf clamps all the way down, so that we can run a flexi line from the transmission to the ends of the hard lines off the side of the transmission onto the chassis. Then we run the hard line down the chassis, past the exhaust manifolds, which is one of the main reasons for running them in hard line, up the inner wing, and along to the front of the inner wing, all in hard line, and then at the front there'll be two more short flexi lines to get the feed and return lines for the transmission cooler, which is built into the top of the air conditioning condenser unit. It's a combined transmission cooler and condenser, and they'll go through there. And tied into that has been another job, which you can see down here, which is revisiting the radiator mountings, because they were basically a lash up. They weren't very nicely done at all, So Bobby's remade the radiator mountings now and made them much nicer, a much more sort of professional setup, and got those welded into place. And then he's made these brackets. These brackets have had to be made bolt-on because we need to be able to remove those to get at the bonnet hinge mountings and also to get at the cooler lines on the other side. We have to route through. We need to be able to get at the unions just inside this gap. He's had to make these brackets bolt-on, which will also make it a bit easier to do the welding, the paint and prep in this area. So if those are welded on, it will be very hard to get coatings into here. So he's got those done. I'm trying to think what else he's now looking at. I can see a dummy anti-roll bar in place. He's now working on the coolant lines for the radiator. We were struggling for space for the coolant lines to get through, and so there's been some revisions in terms of making the coolant lines to the radiator actually clear all of the structure that they need to clear and be possible to fit and unfit. So he's working on that as well. Moving on from that, we will go to the back of the car, and we've had a couple of triumphs here. Triumphs against adversity. As you will see, the car has a new fuel filler flap in a different place. It was there, where, well, I'll leave it to the comments to what you thought of how it looked where it was. That is not in the original Jensen location. The original Jensen location is there, but on the other side of the car, just to really confuse matters. And the eagle-eyed who know a Jensen will know that that isn't a Jensen fuel filler flap. It looks very similar, but slightly sharper cornered, which actually we think suits the car better than the original Jensen one, which I think, and I think most concur, looked too rounded. The corners were too radiused. They looked at odds with the lines of the car a bit. That is actually a BMW E30 filler flap. After you recall from the previous video, me going into some detail about the shortcomings of the fuel filler arrangement as it had been fabricated and made on this car. It was basically no use at all for various reasons. We decided we were going to have to do a complete redesign of that for various reasons. It just wasn't going to work. Basically, it was compromising wheel clearance. Although it did clear the wheel, it was extremely close and we weren't very happy with it. Pretty major thing if you knock it off with a stone coming off your wheel. If it gets trapped between the wheel and the fuel filler and rips the fuel filler pipe off, that's a pretty bad day. Secondary, we weren't at all convinced that the angle of the pipe going away from the fuel filler flap when it was in this position would be sufficient to get the fuel away from the nozzle fast enough to stop the pump clicking off all the time. We were unsure, but I had a pretty good hunch that we were going to have problems with filling it and that the pump would keep clicking off because the fuel wouldn't get away from the nozzle quick enough. When you've got to fill a 120 litre tank, that's a pretty major problem if it takes ages to fill. That's not the aim of the game. That was the second problem. And the third problem was that the fuel filler flap, the revised one, was, although much smaller, very close to that line and this swage line, which meant it was almost impossible to make it look really neat and not distort the swage lines. And the hinge arrangement was terrible and had tons of play in it, which is where we actually started unravelling this whole mess. And the latch mechanism on it was terrible, and the flap was badly made, and the housing for it was badly made. So the long and short was, we decided we were going to move it to a new location and revise. And actually, Cal suggested, why don't we look at an E30 filler flap? They're a really nice, simple mechanism. So we had a look at it, and actually they make an enormous amount of sense. They're a really simple hinge in a really nice place that's really easy to adjust. We're already familiar with these because of using them on our BMWs, on the BMWs that we build. And they're a really functional, really well made, very nice German engineered part that does the job really well. And it also means that if we do that, the parts that associated with this are all still available new from BMW. So the rubber gasket that goes behind it that supports the filler neck and fills in the gap around it is available new from BMW. This is one. And the filler neck that goes inside that feeds the tank is available new for a surprisingly reasonable sum from BMW. So the conclusion we came to was that we'll revise all of that to BMW. That involved making a new recess for that filler flap, and that's where Bobby stepped in. Bobby and Matt worked on that, and did a great job. Bobby used his recent experience of press tool manufacture to make a press tool to press that fuel flap, which worked on second attempt. First attempt probably would have been passable. Second attempt was excellent. First attempt thinned the edges a little bit too much. The radius in the bottom of the tool needed softening just slightly. Second attempt, absolutely perfect. Surprising amount of tonnage to push a recess that deep into a sheet of 18 gauge steel, or 20 gauge steel, sorry. That was done successfully, really good job. Pressed that recess, and then Matt's trimmed that down, got that cut in, TIG welded into the car, bit of lead finishing just to tidy it up around the edges, but that's all TIG butt welded into the quarter panel there. And then Matt has then cut out the old box in the inner quarter panel here and remade the inner quarter so it's all properly closed off to the wheel arch again. Because one of the problems we were having is that there was actually a non-waterproof gap up inside the car on the fuel filler area and how it had been left here. Matt's refabricated that so that problem has gone, and then he's fabricated a new box behind the fuel filler flap here, which then closes off the inside of the car from the outside of the car, closes it all off to the wheel arch and gives us room to get the fuel filler neck in. What remains to be done on this now is modifying. We've bought a new BMW filler neck. That just needs to then be modified to the correct line to feed the fuel tank, and we've solved that problem that we didn't see coming. That was one of those ones, it was an oversight on our part, but it shouldn't have been a problem that needed solving to start with, so I think I'll forgive myself, and we'll forgive ourselves for not seeing that problem coming, because we'd assumed this had been done properly to start with. On that note, you may recall the battle we have been having with the tailgate. Now, Stu, after a little brief respite from that, resumed the battle again a couple of days ago because we still weren't quite happy with the fit of the tailgate, and much as that sounds like a cracked record, we still weren't happy with it. There were still a couple of issues that still needed revising. Well, Stu's investigated that a little bit further, and we discovered something which maybe we should have discovered earlier. However, why would one discover it when it has already been done? We discovered that the tensioning bolts for the springs on the tailgate were the incorrect length, and that at minimum tension, which we had assumed was the minimum tension that these things were designed to operate at minimum tension, there was still a lot of tension on it. Which is probably why it's distorting the tailgate. What we discovered is that the factory OE bolts are actually 3/4 of an inch longer on those tensioners, and that makes a huge difference to the amount of assistance. Now, we don't know how much assistance a Jensen tailgate should have. This just balances the weight. The main thing is now, with the pressure alleviated by that change in tension on those struts, now the tailgate fits. There's some slight revisions on the hinges, a couple of further tweaks were needed on the hinges, and a couple of bits of tweaking of the seals, but most importantly, the reduction in tension on the whole lifter arrangement has now meant that the tailgate fits. We're really happy with that. And finally, we can park that nightmare that has frankly been causing us all quite a lot of stress. So yeah, I think Stu's a happy man to have found that. I think we're all a bit irritated by the fact that we had to find that, and that something that was seemingly already correctly assembled was actually fundamentally incorrectly assembled, and that we didn't know it was incorrectly assembled because we would have no means of knowing. Without a dimensional reference for every bolt on the car, we wouldn't actually know. However, problem solved, dealt with now, and it fits. So that's a happy moment to be at with that, and I think Stu, of all of us, is extremely pleased to get to that situation. Because he's been battling that for quite a long time. And we're probably not going to go into anything on the body shop front. As I mentioned earlier, Mark and Gaz have been doing some metal work in here because we've got a slight dip in the body shop at the minute because of just the way the project's falling into place again. Allegros have gone pretty quickly, which is good. Interceptor's taken a bit longer, and this would have been the next car into the body shop. As it is, we have quite an exciting project that's going to be going into the paint shop. But I'm not going to talk about that this week. We'll see what that is next week. So we have another project coming in ahead of the Interceptor into paint now. So yeah, that'll be quite a nice thing to see. Mark's been doing various bits of paintwork on small items, as you call them, I suppose. He's been painting some of the running gear for the Allegros, and also with that paint, Mark's done a little bit of work for a little job down at the den. There's a trolley over there which is going to be carrying our new wheel alignment kit. We could have bought the wheel alignment kit with a big trolley, but it took up a huge amount of space and we weren't really very keen on it. So we bought the wall-mounted wheel alignment kit, and then instead of wall mounting it, we're mounting it onto what was a disused trolley from one of our select jigs, actually, that we don't need anymore because it carried the old mechanical measuring system. So we've done a little bit of re-engineering of that, and that's now going to be carrying our wheel alignment down at the den. And so Mark's done a bit of paintwork on that. He's done some various bits of paintwork, as I say, for other projects that are in build as well. But yes, I think next week there'll be new things to see on the body shop front, and I'll be able to hand over and let Mark do his thing again next week in there. But I think for this week I've probably rambled on quite enough. There was a lot to cover actually. At that point I'm going to hand over to Cal to take you through assembly shop and nip down the road.
Right, thank you very much, Nat. And I'm starting in the office, surrounded by anodised aluminium parts. So I would say in the last episode, technically it wasn't the last episode, but the last one where we actually showed work going on in the workshop, these parts were just heading off to be anodised. So these are the accent colour parts for Project Kuma, the second of the two Mark 1 Escorts we're doing. So cam cover, all the instrument bezels, badges that go in the speaker grills on the doors, fuel cap, handbrake grip, the end finishers for the door pull handles, the top part of the gear knob, and these are the mounts for the damper reservoirs in the boot, which are this gunmetal grey colour, which I think has turned out exactly how I hoped it would, so looking forward to seeing them in the car. And then as the cycle continues, we have a massive batch of parts to go away for black anodising here, some of which are Project Kuma, so the mirror bezel parts are in there. There's also quite a number of parts for the Redux M3s in there, and then the lower part of the cam cover, which this fits on top of, for Project Kuma, which is going away for black anodising as well. So that is exciting stuff. I'm going to just grab something from here, which I will elaborate on later. Okay, let's head this way. We're not going to show what's going on down the den this week. Nick's away on holiday. Martin is busy down there beavering away installing our detailing booth, but we'll show the progress down there next week. Don't forget, we're having our launch party on the 21st of September, which is not far away now. If you go onto the denautomotive.co.uk website, you can register on there to come along. Look forward to seeing you. Right, anyway, Project Kuma, Alex is beavering away at the moment with one of his most favourite things in the world, the ATL fuel sender, which I think he has just successfully calibrated. Yeah. So, although we did eventually come to a conclusion on a fuel sender that does work with a foam-filled tank, their calibration routine seems to be a little bit hit and miss, but he's got there in the end with that, so that's good. And actually also on this, George has been doing the 3D printed column shroud, so there's a prototype one in there at the minute, which looks really good. Happy with that, so we're going to switch over to printing that in the carbon reinforced material that's a bit more heat stable, and then that will be the final item that will get leathered for the final installation, and looking forward to seeing the graphite gunmetal cam cover in there as well. Moving on from that, lots of Allegro stuff going on, and in fact behind the camera over there is the orange car, which is now in the assembly hall alongside the Harvest Gold, optimistically titled colour. So, starting here, fuel tanks. Anthony has been assembling these tanks with the radium fuel pump assemblies. So basically replacing the original in-tank pump which sat into here. We've got an upgraded pump and nice little billet top cap from Radium, which has the Dash 6 threaded connections on it, so we can use threaded fuel line, which we will throughout, and then you've got this little studs here to connect fuel pump wiring to. We've used the original fuel senders. They were both still working perfectly well, so we've stuck with the original because you can't get new ones from Honda. Everything else is basically new, so weirdly there's a difference in the two tanks. I might have mentioned this before. It must be a switchover in years that on this tank there's a metal pipe which runs from here and internally runs all the way up to the top here to vent the air out of the highest point. Whereas with this tank, they ditched that and had a vent straight into the top of the tank. Interestingly, and that's the only difference. So this one's got a brand new vent piece from Honda here, which has got a little rollover valve in it. This one doesn't, but they both have this little vent valve, brand new from Honda as well. As I've mentioned before, the Honda parts supply is pretty good. And then the tank straps are Xylem coated. We put neoprene strip on there for where they sit under the tank, and then all the bolts and fasteners are zinc nickel plated. On this car, and interestingly, I'll touch on that in a minute with the car as well, but we're doing different coloured platings for different cars. So this car is having zinc nickel, which is this kind of slight blue-grey finish, whereas the orange car is having yellow zinc passivate, which is like a bright gold finish. Just because of the way those colours sit with the cars. I wasn't keen on gold on this car because with the slightly browny gold exterior colour, I don't think it would work too well. And then laying on the table over here, lots of bits that Mark has been busy painting. So we've got the anti-roll bars for the second Allegro. James has stripped down the steering columns from both cars. As with all the Honda stuff, absolutely mint condition, so it was really just a case of preparing them and painting them to make them look pretty. But functionality wise, they were spot on. Same with the steering rack with the other car as well. We've stripped the casing down stripped the rack down to the bare casing. But in terms of all the wearing parts, it's all spot on, so we've just bead blasted the casing and painted it. Drive shafts, we're refurbing the Honda ones. We've had far too many bad experiences with aftermarket shafts and CV joints being worse than used OEM ones, so we're actually going with the used OEM ones. There's nothing wrong with them, so we've just stripped them down completely, stripped out the CVs, cleaned everything, bead blasted everything, painted the shafts, painted the cups, reassembled the CVs and re-greased them, and then there's a variety of bracketry, steering column mounts, the rack mounts for the second car, all in a polyurethane. You'll probably have heard Mark referring to direct a lot, and he does it sort of casually without contemplating the fact that people might know what that is. So direct, when he refers to that, is a Celimix product, which is a polyurethane paint which can be applied direct to metal. Obviously it's wise to etch the finish of the metal first so it adheres well to it by blasting or sanding, but it's just a very, very tough finish to go straight over metal components. And then we've got the radiators through from Concept Racing. So we originally, when we did the mock-up build, we bought some just really cheap sort of off-the-shelf Civic radiators, and then modified where we needed the pipe and the neck, etc. to be, and the fan mounts, and then we basically provided that to Concept Racing, and they've made us the final items, so it's nice to have those through. Starting to collect all the parts together to get things going together. That tank is about ready to go into this car, and to be honest, if we were desperate to see it on the floor, it could be rolling. Subframes are all in, so as is now really obvious, Integra DC2, all rear end components, brakes are on, anti-roll bar, we've got Nitron two-way adjustable coilovers all round on it, which are just an off-the-shelf Nitron kit for the DC2 Integra. And yeah, it's going together pretty well. Handbrake cables are now in, we're running all the brake plumbing. Bobby was very good at the dry build phase on this, and this is where Global Workshop, the app and software that we use, really comes into its own, because not only is it great for updating the customers of what we've done, it's great for reference stuff. So when we do a photographic update that we add into the timeline, so for instance when Bobby mocked up all of the fuel and brake lines, he did detailed photos of all of that, uploaded them as an update on Global Workshop, and then we're able to refer back to that when we're doing the final build. But to take it a step further than that, you can actually generate what they call a smart code from that update, which will generate both a web link and a QR code. So we can actually paste that web link into our project management stuff. So we can, when the guys know that, oh, we're going to be onto this job, click that link, go straight to the update. Also, if we wanted to, although we haven't been taking it to this level, we can create a QR code label which we could put onto a component. So let's say the fuel tank, we could stick the QR code on that when the guys scan it, it goes straight to the update that has the photos of how the fuel system is installed. So it's a good little insight into the way Global Workshop can be used. Yeah, coming around to the front, all the front cross members, subframes all in, brakes are in, standard DC2 Integra. You can see at the front here all of the zinc nickel plating we've used throughout on everything here. outer CVs are in, just so we can get the wheels on, but obviously the rest of the shafts will be waiting until the engine and box is in. Steering rack's in place. I don't know if we showed it last week or not, but it's quite cool that we put the headlights in, which was just a visual transformation. It was quite exciting. I should move around here so you can get the camera around this side. So yeah, it's just super exciting at the minute to see this coming together. We're shortly going to start measuring up for the wiring loom. So Alex has been doing all the planning and design work on the wiring harness, including quite a lot of testing some of the methods we want to use. So for instance, he wants to use pulse width modulation, speed control on both the engine cooling fan and the interior blower. To do away with the original blower, you basically have a three-way switch, and it switches whether it goes through one winding of a resistor or the other winding of a resistor, and because that resistor gets hot, it's in the airflow to basically take the heat away from it. But it's a bit of a primitive method of speed control, and when we've gone to the extent of putting these PWMs, sorry not PWMs, getting all my letters mixed up, PDMs in the car, power distribution modules, it makes sense to use as many of the functionalities as possible. And technically you can control the speed of a motor with pulse width modulation, which is basically just turning it on and off very fast. But we were a little concerned about whether that would generate any excess heat. You also need to put a flyback diode, I think I'm right in saying, in there, so that when you basically turn off the motor, the current that the motor is effectively generating by spinning doesn't backfeed to the PDM. So we want to do some bench testing with that. So that's one of the things Alex has been on with, is basically we set up a motor, 50% duty cycle, running all day to see whether the flyback diodes got hot, see whether the PDM got hot, see whether the motor got hot. And yeah, it was absolutely spot on. So kind of proved out the method that we're going to use on that, and we can also use the same method on the engine cooling fan to dial up or down the speed of that fan if we want to. So the orange car, obviously we're gathering all the parts together to do the mechanical build-up on that. But we're also got it in here so we can start bolting the electrical components into that. So Alex will then be able to do his rope looms, so basically laying out rope in the shape of the wiring loom to all the different components, so he can go from having the list of everything the loom needs to attach to and the type of connectors, he can then add into that the dimensions taken from the rope loom, and then that's the final step before actually being able to make the wiring harness for that. And that's going to be one of the next sort of things on both of these, is moving towards getting the wiring harness in tandem with building them up mechanically. So that is pretty cool. Down here, caught it very luckily out the corner of my eye. The upper wishbones, showed them last time, fresh from machining for Churchill this is. They're basically two-piece wishbones, so they sit side by side like that, and the upper ball joint is sandwiched into the gap between those two. These went away for Xylan coating, have come back, and then James has now pressed the bushes into these, which I think I'm right in saying is Jag X300 upper arm bushes. Essentially we used a modified X300 upper arm as our mock-up arm, and then we've machined a version of that. And then also on Churchill, the engine is back, or the engine block is back from machining. So we discovered that there was some wear to the bores on that engine, and it's not possible, although I'm hoping somebody's not going to point out that it is possible, but to my knowledge it's not possible to get replacement oversized pistons for those HA16 engines. So we basically had the liners bored out and then standard size liners refitted into it to take it back to a perfect condition, standard bore size, so we can use standard pistons on it. So that's where we're at with Churchill's block. And then on the subject of Churchill, I'm going to show you what Luke has been on with up in the cab den. We'll have a brief cut, so it's not retro power and cut, and I'll see you up there. Hi, Luke Bailey here, and welcome to the cab den. Let me just clear these Greg's sausage roll crumbs off my desk, and I shall show you what I've been up to. So, what we are doing is we're working. Right, come on, serious. We're working on Churchill stuff. So, we're working on Churchill interior. So, when Luke himself showed you where we were at a couple of weeks ago, he was just sort of in the early stages of modelling a lot of this stuff, including the door cards. And we're trying to get to the point where we can not only show the design to the client and get his go ahead with it, but then push it forward to the point where we can actually start making parts. Because these renderings, as you've probably gathered over the weeks and months and years, are not just for showing how something is going to look. It's actually going to be physical models that we will then machine the parts from. So this is basically the rendering set that we generated to send to the client. It's basically showing the full interior. The seats are just a rough representation. There was no point spending the time modelling the seats accurately, given that they already exist, but they're there for kind of visual representation. But certainly in terms of the finishes on everything and the overall layout, that's where we're at. And then this is quite a nice representation of actually showing some of the construction. So the fascia panel itself will actually be hand fabricated in aluminium, probably be CNC laser cut in terms of the actual profile of it, but it'll be hand formed in terms of the curves. And that'll be hydro dipped with the wood grain effect, which we have already done a sample of and had that okayed. And then he's also designed all the framework that sits underneath that mounts it. So that bolts onto mounting points on the shell, which are actually in this scan. You can just see them down here. They were scanned from the car. And then there will be bonded studs or bosses on the underside of this fascia, which will then bolt to the top surfaces of these frames. We've also got components under here, like the transmission controller at the front here, so we can make sure that there's space for that and where the connections go into that. And then if I go back into the CAD rather than just the renders, and let's say I hide that side, you can start seeing some of the actual componentry itself. So you can see all of the fabricated mounting brackets. So from this, we will be able to essentially unfold these in the CAD and then send them to the CNC plasma to cut the 2D pattern for these so they can then be folded up. And then lots of the components are billet. So these little bezels that are going to be a polished copper finish, they are going to be machined in brass because it copper plates very nicely from brass billet. This insert here, which is going to have a cordless phone charger in it, will be machined from aluminium, as will this section here with the cup holders. But then to avoid having to start with a billet of aluminium this deep and machine almost all of it away, we're doing just this top plate here as a billet aluminium part, black anodized, and then the actual cup holder inserts themselves will be a 3D print. Machined tray at the back here, and then the armrest lid again will be a machined section with an insert that's wrapped in the leather from the rest of the interior on the underside of it. He's modelled the hinges as well. There'll be little machined hinges pivoting on a stainless steel rod at the back here. Cigar holder, which I think he mentioned in his video that this client is quite into his cigars, and the general vibe of the car, especially being Project Churchill, has that general feel about it. And then up here we've got the gear shifter sits into here, a little display at the side down here, so the back of this will have LEDs, and these little filters will show you the letters of what gear you're in. And then this section here, there are a row of toggle switches. Here and here are the controls for the Alpine Freestyle infotainment system that we're going to be using, because kind of very much against pure touchscreen. It's a pain in the backside to use when you're driving. So the Alpine do these really nice freestyle units, they call them, where there's physical keys to operate them. They don't look the most pretty design, so sometimes it's trying to work things out to make them look integrated in. So we're mounting them sideways in here and then sort of almost mimicking the same shapes underneath, and these are just going to be the legends that tell you what this row of switches do. So yeah, we're very much at the stage we're just going to be starting to generate the models for the individual components, passing them down the chain of people to check and double check and make sure we've not made any bonehead mistakes with them, and then all that stuff can be sent off for machining. Also, if you look at the red parts on the back, these are all the retainer pieces that are going to be 3D prints, which bolt into the back of the billet parts and clamp them up against the fascia there. So that is what Luke has been doing in between sausage roll sessions. We'll go and see what George has been up to. Actually, I can see what George is up to without going over to George's computer. So I'm going to just give a little bit of backstory on the Saab. Now, this actually started from a cosmetic point of view, with the client seeing this concept by a chap named Ash Thorpe, a very talented designer, who did this awesome rendering set of obviously a very, very motorsport aggressive looking Saab 900, which does look, I must admit, the absolute, yeah, imsatastic, as Jarkle just said. It really does. Looks awesome. Now, this sort of conversation led into, I'd love something like that for the road, but it needs to be fairly well toned down and refined. And we looked around and found various other ones like this one here, which has done the rounds on the internet, but it wanted to be more aggressive than this. This was the general vibe. And we kind of circled around a little bit with the Singer DLS Turbo that's obviously been doing the rounds on the internet a lot and going to some big shows like Festival of Speed. So something more aggressive and wider than that, but not as aggressive as the sort of IMSA-inspired Ashthorpe concept. And then that led sort of via our initial 2D renders to where we're at now, which, generally speaking, I think George and I are extremely happy with where we've got to. Obviously, we're still in relatively early stages of the 3D modelling. We've widened the whole body, which obviously was a kind of fairly fundamental remit of the design. At the front, we've done it by actually adding sections, widening the grille essentially, and moving the headlights outboard to widen the entire front. And if I, hang on, I'm trying to rotate this like it's CAD and it's not, it's just an image. Massive fail. What we're trying to do is create a crisp line still down the side of the car, which once you start inflating the width of the car becomes extremely difficult, and it's hard to kind of retain the original essence of the Saab whilst making it massively inflated, because one of the very sort of critical points of the original design was this dead straight arrow straight line down the side of the car, and the fact it was generally quite slabby. So it's been quite a challenge, although I think the front end came together pretty quickly. The bit that we've really been battling with over the last couple of weeks really is the back end and trying to resolve this rear corner. We went through a million iterations of this shape at the back here, and we really want to keep this theme of having a sort of air outlet at the back and still having the original profile of the car visible within it, a bit like the Singer DLS. But then trying to resolve this shape where you've got quite a sharp shape leading into nothing here, and that's the bit that's really been troubling us. You know, we kind of done various iterations of the shape change along the side, the inflation of the arch shape, the way this tapers up the quarter, and then the addition of this sharp crease, and we raised that up from some of the earlier iterations, which definitely, if I go back to one of them actually, if I can, this is going to go badly wrong. Yeah, so this is here. One of the criticisms we had was we had this line sort of slightly dropping down here, and the more we looked at it, the more we didn't think that worked so well. It needed to be a straighter, crisper line. So these were some of the earlier iterations, and this shape here was probably the best we had it. We then moved on to a number of other changes, and this is often the case. You go through different iterations to prove the ones that don't work. So we had, for a while, this line swooping down at the back, but from that view actually it doesn't look too bad, but when you view that one directly square on from the side, it looks pretty terrible. So it's just going through the motions, and I think we're at the point, we were chatting earlier today, and we still need to get this bit right, and that's the bit, the last remaining part essentially. I think the side view is looking pretty awesome. It's just the way this terminates at the back here, and we're talking now about possibly introducing a slight swage line along near the bottom of the boot, so we can get this crisp line to flow round into that swage line. So yes, it's an iterative process, and it's amazing how some bits fall into place really easy and some bits don't. And the Quattro just fell together really well. The Scimitar, which you've seen in previous episodes, challenged us in a lot of ways. There was a sort of swage line leading from the front, which was really hard work to get looking right near the front. This one was the opposite. The front fell into place really well. Everything forward of there, I think, absolutely fits the design brief. Just resolving this area here, which is the bit that's challenging us. But I think we're probably, seeing where we're at earlier today, I reckon this back will be sort of resolved pleasingly by the end of play next week, I would have thought. So yes, that's where we're at with the Saab. And one thing I'm going to say before we go, I had them last week, but I didn't want to publicise it because Kelly was off last week, and I knew that meant they wouldn't get posted out until this week. But we have the third iteration of our limited edition key rings now available. So if you go on the website retropower.co.uk, go into the shop section, get yourself some of these before they sell out, because they seem to sell out extremely fast. And on that note, I'll see you again next week.